And thank you that we have to move you back and forth. I know some of you were here shortly after the president was giving a presser after casting his vote. But we thought that we should respond to the critical media queries that were addressed to us by members of the press regarding a very important topic which we thought we cannot continue to ignore, because the narrative that has been created on the other side of this story is growing and it needs to be put in a clear perspective. But as I start, allow me to recognize the presence of another senior member of the Council of Leaders for the Tonse Alliance, President Roosevelt Tonga, who is a friend and a colleague of mine, and with whom we are working together as the appointed agents for the presidential candidate and the vice presidential candidate for the Tonse Alliance, President Brian Mundubile, and Vice President Makebi Zulu. Our responsibilities started today, and we thought we should just disrupt that work to come and address the press on this very important issue. I think members of the press have asked me so many times to respond to the allegation that was first made by the Republican president to the effect that we, or the Tonse Alliance leadership, had sponsored people to go and train in military activities in Russia with the purpose to come and disrupt the elections and just also disrupt the country. And the president issued a warning that anybody responsible for sponsorship of those young men who went to Russia to train should not do that without expecting to be arrested. We also are aware that the two permanent secretaries in the Ministry of Home Affairs, Mr. Tabo Kawana and Mr. Matembo, also did a mockery of these young men by suggesting that the state is holding criminals who went to Russia to train to come and disrupt the nation. We thought that at the beginning we thought we could ignore those statements because we felt that they were being made without foundation. But we've noticed that the narrative has been planted like a seed, and it is beginning to grow because every other media house associated with the UPND is beginning to parrot this narrative, suggesting, as they are, that some serious offense had been committed by these young men with a view to come and disrupt. And then against the backdrop of the threat that was issued by the president, we are now being called upon to respond to that allegation. I want to state at the beginning that the young men that are being spoken about are three young men. One of them is Victor Mziamba, there's Dixon Tembo, and Gideon Kalopa. These are young men that were responsible for providing security to the presidential candidate and the vice presidential candidate for the Tonse Pamozi Alliance at the time that we were going through the campaign period. On behalf of the president and the vice president of the Tonse Alliance, we were met with incidences which were slightly ugly. Twice, our presidential candidate was threatened with being killed. If everybody followed what happened in Mutendere when a child was shot at, it was established that that was intended for the president. Again, when the group was in Mukushi, there was information that came to our attention that some mercenaries were within the crowd who had been attempting to harm or even kill the presidential candidate and his running mate. So our security detail felt it necessary to elevate the security around the two candidates. And in those deliberations, it was found necessary by our security detail that we train people to provide what is called very, very important security personnel training, VVIP training. Now, this is not a strange activity. Everybody that feels threatened have got the right to elevate their security. And when people are given an opportunity to go and train, it cannot be deliberately misinterpreted as an attempt to come and disrupt the nation. In fact, we are aware ourselves that these young men, when they were returning from Russia, they present themselves at the airport. If anybody had gone to train in any sort of training that is being alleged now, They wouldn't have come openly at that international airport and presented themselves to immigration officials when they arrived. It is because they knew that what they went to train in Russia was a decent assignment to come and enhance security around our candidates. And when they were interviewed, they explained in all clear terms on what the assignment in Russia was. Unfortunately, these young men have been in detention for now close to a month. And during this period, they've actually not been given access to their lawyers. They have not been presented before the courts of law. They've not been charged with any offense. They have not been allowed access to their family members. We are informed that they're not even being allowed to be fed by family members. Last week, out of concern, we sent lawyers to try and track them down because we didn't even know where these young men were being kept. And it was established that these young men had been taken to the Mwembeshi, correctional facility, and they were being kept in Communicado. The lawyers went there and demanded to have access to their clients, and they were told in no uncertain terms that nobody is allowed to have access to these clients. In fact, the time they arrived, the information or the report they filed with us is that at that time, the young men were actually being attended to by doctors, for reasons that we may not be aware right now. One can only assume that possibly they have been taken ill because the lawyers were told that they couldn't access them partly because they were being attended to by doctors. Okay, now, our concern is this. These young men went to train as security personnel. If one chooses to interpret that training as an attempt to come and carry out any military activities in the country, it's very unfortunate. But again, when you have a country which is governed by the law, it makes very little sense for somebody who occupies the office of a president to make such an inflammatory remark against citizens of the nation, like these young men are, instead of leaving it to law enforcement agencies to carry out a due investigation, establish if there's any level of criminality in that matter. We think that the president's remarks are very inflammatory to start with, but also they can provoke the state to begin to create a narrative that actually is wrong. Citizens can begin to think that indeed the Tonse Pamoja Alliance are nothing more than a group of highway criminals that would like to commit treasonous charges against the state, which in fact is not true. What is important is the president must have allowed the investigation to be carried out. I mean, it only takes about 3 or 4 days to investigate and find facts about what was happening, where these young men went to go and train. But to keep them incommunicado, to prevent them from having access to their family members, to prevent them from having access to lawyers, and then come out as citizen number one, the fountain of justice in the nation, the Republican president, and make such a highly inflammatory remark against them without any amount of justification. We think that this is a miscarriage of justice on the part of the president, but also it creates a narrative that is totally false. We think that either the president has been fed wrong information by the people who are holding these young men, or the president has just made a viewpoint that is not informed by what actually transpired where these young men went. We think that in all fairness, those who are parroting these statements on social media are making it they're making it difficult for these young men to have their fair share under the law, because when somebody is accused, they must be given an opportunity to be investigated. They must be given an opportunity to have lawyers access them so they can give their side of the story. And if the state feels that an offense has been committed, they must be given a fair share in court so they can explain their side of the story. But to begin to brand them as criminals, to begin to brand them as people that would like to come and carry out terrorist activities in this country is not only unjust and unfair, but also it creates a difficult environment within which no professional objective investigation can be carried out. So we thought we should make this thing very clear. There is nobody under the Tonse Alliance who was sent anywhere in the world to go and train to come and carry out terrorist activities in this country, or to come and carry out any treasonable activities in this country. The only truth is that these young men that were sent, we responded to the need for us to provide elevated security for our leaders who have been threatened. Zambians are still, able to remember the ugly scenes that happened in Northwestern Province and in Western Province, where our leaders were drawn into danger, where firearms were discharged. And again, even after that, what we noticed is that instead of arresting people that were committing crimes, our young men who were escorting our leaders are the ones who have ended up in custody, when real criminals who were carrying out who were conducting those criminal activities are walking scot-free. It's a country that is about to be liberated. But we think that Zambians must pay due attention to what happened to these young men. Yes, listen to what the president said, but analyze it on the basis of what we've explained now as what exactly transpired. You don't help the nation by creating a narrative that can't be justified, especially at the time when Zambians are making a decision of whether to retain the government that is in power or indeed to replace it by people that are bidding to take over government. In this context, there must be fairness at every level. And I've always argued that when it comes to the responsibility under the Constitution to ensure that the country is being managed justly and fairly, that responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of the president, and the president cannot be held to making the remarks that we've been hearing on social media. We think that Zambians must interrogate this issue very seriously and consider that it is a wrong time for the president to make this statement. At any other time, the president should have allowed investigative wings to be the ones to be able to update the nation on what transpired with these young men, because fairness demands that an investigation must be carried out by people that are qualified to do that investigation. Fairness demands that even those who are accused are given an opportunity to also give their side of the story. It doesn't demand that you can keep children or young men incommunicado and then begin to make statements that are highly incriminating about them without an opportunity for the public to size up the other side of the story. So we make an earnest plea to the Republican president. If it is a state's position that this young man went to train in what is being suggested they went to train in, please allow them to be investigated fairly, and professionally, and have them presented before the courts of law so that it can be explained to the nation what exactly that training was all about. Thank you very much for listening to me.